The Wide Streets Commissioners were a public body, an entity established in 1758 under an Act of Parliament. And they acted effectively as a planning body, but also as a development agency. And they were responsible for basically the redesign of much of the city centre of Dublin. Their first piece of work was to create this new street, later called Parliament Street, to link Essex Bridge, or what we now know as Capel Street Bridge, with Dublin Castle and Dame Street. So it was basically a dense pile-up of medieval buildings, that there was no particular straight route through it. It was like most of the medieval city was, buildings that started out probably in the medieval period and then were adapted and rebuilt. And so it was a complete mess of kind of urban fabric. And also cutting across Parliament Street, and had pretty much been forgotten at this point, was that you had the city wall. So if you look at Roke's map, for instance, and Roke's map of 1756, which is a very interesting map that sort of records the city just before the Wide Streets Commissioners started their work, he doesn't record the city walls in this area at all, but the Wide Streets Commissioners do in their survey maps.
Yes, one of the interesting things about Dublin, like a lot of cities I suppose, is that when you look back at old maps, you can see the layers, going back in time, and you can see where the medieval city, with its core around what is now Christchurch, Civic Offices, Dublin Castle, that area, and then as it developed out in all directions really, and you can then see over time how the city developed and how maybe the centre moved a little bit east really, towards say Grafton Street, O'Connell Street, that sort of axis. And these records tell the story of that. They tell the story of how that happened. They tell the story of how the streets that we walk down now, that we shop in, that we have a coffee in, that we travel through, it tells the story of how those streets became what they are now. And one of the fascinating things I think, particularly for example, if you take the maps, you can look at one of the Wide Streets Commission maps, you can see the line of the road, you can see the corner of Westmoreland Street and College Green, and it's exactly the same now as it was then, all those hundreds of years ago. And I just think it's really fantastic for people, particularly maybe those who aren't as familiar with the historical sources as, say, historians are, to see how much is there in the past, in the written record, in the handwritten record in this case, and how much we can do to bring all of that to life. And I think it really adds something to your experience of the city. This current project is focusing on sets of handwritten minutes from the Wide Streets Commissioners and also from Dublin Corporation. They're handwritten, so the aim of the project is to get people to transcribe what's written by hand to make it more easily readable by researchers and by the general public. And of course, back in the day they had nice handwriting, but not always easily readable by the modern eye. And it's a great opportunity for people to look back at how things were done in the past and making that information available to us now.
The Wide Streets Commissioners collection is probably of international importance. There are very few instances, I think, where you have such a detailed cartographic record of a city in a point in time. The Wide Streets Commission collection includes a series of between 800 and 900 maps. Those maps include survey maps of areas of the city that were to be redeveloped by the Wide Streets Commissioners, which provide a massive amount of detail about the names of building owners, the names of the traders that operated from the buildings, the types of businesses that operated there. It gives you information on the widths of each of the plots on the street up to that time, and provides you with a massive amount of detail that is really quite extraordinary.
It's important to make historical sources open and available to researchers and members of the public for a very basic reason, which is that if we don't make them available, we are at risk of being lied to about what's in them. And researchers come to these sources all the time asking new questions, and questions that we didn't envisage in the past before, or things that we might not have thought were important. People have a very kind of old school idea about what history is sometimes, that history is the story of how kings and queens went to war or married or how they governed countries. But that's not what history is anymore. History is learning about how people lived in the past at a far more granular level, and what you and I, ordinary people, would have experienced if we were living in the 15th century. And the reason that we approach history like that now is because there's more and more researchers and members of the public coming and probing those stories. And it's not just about kind of the elite. We want to know about everything. Digitization has two really important functions in making sources open. A lot of the historical sources are fragile because they're old, maybe because of the way they've been stored, or because they've been used over and over again by researchers. And every time you take a source out and you use it, you're at risk of damaging it, or you're at risk of it degrading in some way. If we digitize the sources, then we make sure that the source, the original primary material source, is protected. It doesn't have to be taken out every time a researcher wants to look at it. And then the second thing that digitization does is it makes that source openly available in a way that we can't make the primary source available. If you digitize something, you're most likely going to put it online, and that means people from all over the world can access it at any time they want. And that gives a whole new open access to this item. So they're the two important things that digitization does: protecting the source itself and making it open and accessible to even more people.
So Transcription Week is a crowdsourcing initiative where we're looking to get people to join us, go online, read these scanned handwritten documents and transcribe them, basically type out what they see. And for that week, it's a great opportunity for people who are interested in history to get involved in doing some real historical work. It will help us, obviously, in terms of making information available to the public, but also help everybody in making these wonderful records just more accessible. And there's material in the records, in these handwritten minutes, the minutes of the Wild Streets Commission, also the minutes of Dublin Corporation, that are about the streets that we walk down every day. People who are living in Dublin, visiting Dublin, working in Dublin. So it's a very real link to the past. People will be reading about the places that they know. And I think that's really exciting. You can look back and see, well, what were people saying about the development of what became O'Connell Street, or Parliament Street, Delir Street, Westmoreland Street, Grafton Street, Henry Street, all these places that we all know. It's good fun for people, and it's making a good contribution to historiography and to the history of the city.
Dublin in the mid-18th century would have been largely unrecognisable for many of us today. So the minutes are transcripts of the proceedings of the meetings of the White Streets Commissioners, and I suppose you're going to get discussions and arguments about various developments in the city. You're going to see evidence of their decision making that led to the large-scale transformation of Dublin to a modern Georgian city in the second half of the 18th century. So in many ways you're going to get an insight into the minds of a series of very influential people that governed and shaped the development of the city in the mid-18th century.
It completely just gives you a picture of how the government developed and transformed into what we know it as today. When it first began, it wouldn't have had the functions that it did. This all came with time, and the minutes will show how that developed and the work that they put into it. It gives you a picture of the Dublin City Council during this period. There's day-to-day functions and how people lived and how people wrote and the language. There's also, if you have any interest in history, coming across Daniel O'Connell's signature will give you kind of a jolt of excitement to see that it's there. We learn about the famine and everything, but to see a letter to Queen Victoria, talking about the famine in these big old volumes, it just makes it more real. It makes history come to life.
And we're delighted to be involved in the transcription part because it benefits us, benefits the public, and it's a great opportunity for people to get involved in something that's history related. And you can do it from your home, you can do it from school, you can do it from the office, and we'll give people all the help we can. It's a great opportunity for people to get involved, and we hope lots of people will.